Hello, I'm Adam Wren.
And I'm Megan Messerly. It's Friday, August 22nd.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming White House reporter Megan Messerly back to the show. Good morning, Megan.
Good morning, Adam. How are you?
Good. It's always so fun to have you. What a treat.
It's always so lovely to be here.
Let's get right to what's driving the day. Our first story today has to do with the power, or occasionally sometimes the lack thereof, of political rhetoric. In their ongoing effort to come back from their devastating losses at the ballot box in November, Democrats have gotten some new guidance on how to win over voters, and we have all the details for you today, fresh in Playbook and here on the podcast. And it's not so much about what they should do, Megan, as it is about what they should not do. I'm going to throw out some terms here: triggering,
Okay.
heteronormative, microaggression, food insecurity. These are just a few of the handful of words that the center-left Democratic group Third Way are saying that Democrats should avoid in their political messaging and talking points. They say, quote, "The words put a wall between us and everyday people of all races, religions, and ethnicities. These are words that people simply do not say, yet they hear them from Democrats," end quote. We obtained this memo shared with us first by Third Way, about 45 different words across 6 categories, from criminal justice to faculty lounge phraseology, that Democrats should just stay clear of. And so this comes as Democrats are sorting through the wreckage, the rubble of their November losses, losing substantially up and down the ballot in counties across the United States. Megan, I was fascinated by J.D. Vance this week when he sat down with Laura Ingraham, and she asked him essentially, how deep in the wilderness are Democrats? And he responded, "I'd give them some free political advice. They just need to stop sounding crazy." And it's remarkable, Megan, because essentially you have a Democratic aligned group coming to the same exact conclusion. What do you make of this?
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And I really think this is something that the Republican Party, the MAGA movement, has been harping on. I just think back to the election when President Trump and his campaign, they really were trying to pitch him as the party of common sense and the candidate of common sense, right? This idea that we, the Republican Party, and I, Donald Trump, am aligned with you on these everyday bread and butter issues, which I know from the Democrats will get some eye rolls at, with his penchant for gilded halls and things of that nature, his use of the word groceries and saying that that's an old-fashioned term. There's quibbles you can have there. But by and large, the argument that the Republican Party has been making is that Democrats are out of touch, right? They're the language police. Democrats are just trying to take the fun out of everything. This is the argument that Republicans have been making. Whether you agree with it or not, it has resonated with a lot of voters. And I think that's what we're seeing here through this memo and this long list of words that Third Way is saying that Democrats shouldn't use, is this attempt to get back to this idea of common sense and the regular people, and maybe decrease some of that distance that at least maybe some voters might perceive exists between them and the Democratic Party.
What's interesting to me, you kind of capture the cultural zeitgeist here, but somebody once said recently that it's punk rock to be Republican right now. It's a rebellious, cool, social norms breaking thing to be a Republican. And it's not as sort of cool to be a Democrat. The energy right now, culturally, and we are going to talk about this throughout the show today, but there's a cultural resonance to being a Republican in a way where just a decade or two ago, it was more sort of punk to be a Democrat than it is now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we're seeing. I mean, you just look at the resonance of the Republican Party, of President Trump, with, for instance, college age students. Like back when I was in college, you think college kids are liberals. Now, these days, you think college kids are probably MAGA. And that just reflects how much the culture has really shifted and how it has become sort of cool and countercultural to support Trump and support the Republican Party. And I think that the White House and Republicans have really leaned into that in a very effective way. And Democrats just have not quite yet figured out how to regain that lost ground, whether that's being more everyday of the people, whether it's being countercultural, right? They very much are in this place where people perceive them as the ones who are defenders of elite institutions. Whether or not any of that is actually true, there certainly are these perceptions out there. And Democrats have been doing lots of soul searching on where to move forward from all of this. And again, this may just be at the surface level of changing some of the verbiage that Democrats use, but I think it does in some way reflect that there is a gap, even if it's a rhetorical gap, and probably more than a rhetorical gap, between Democrats and voters.
Yeah, and in so many ways, it seems to me like since November, Democrats are literally trying to talk their way out of the wilderness, and they're trying
Mhm.
to do the same things that Republicans did last year. I mean, going on the Manosphere podcast, something that Barron Trump advised his father to do, and to great effect. He was on Joe Rogan, he was on Andrew Schul's podcast, just pretty remarkably culturally. And, you think about one word in particular that Third Way says a Democrat should avoid is triggered or triggering. And if you think about it, Donald Trump Jr.'s own podcast is called Triggered.
Yeah.
That's just an example, I think, of how Republicans have effectively co opted some of these words in a way that helps them. You can go back to 2016 with Hillary Clinton and look at the way that the MAGA movement adopted the word deplorables and wore that as sort of a badge of honor. And so I think
Mhm.
Republicans have just sort of outmaneuvered Democrats on this issue for so long.
And I'll let some scholar rhetoric get more into this, but I even think about the word woke itself, right? There's a really long history there that we don't have time to get into, but the fact that Republicans have weaponized this word to be everything they despise is just another example of how they've co opted some of that language for their own purposes. And now, no Democrat running for office probably wants to be associated for woke, or at least any of them running in any swing district or anywhere where they might need to court some more moderate support. And again, I think that's just reflective of how Republicans are winning this rhetorical battle. But there's obviously some deeper policy issues at play as well.
The second big story today comes to us from the streets of Washington, where the president's crackdown on the district continues. And one thing that's clear, Megan, is that the Trump administration is really leaning in on this. It seemed in the beginning they were looking for some quick PR wins, but they seem to like the visuals. We saw Vice President J.D. Vance go to Union Station earlier this week. And then last night, we saw Donald Trump do kind of a rah rah, shaking hands and pizza with the National Guard troops and police officers for dinner. Megan, we know Trump to be a showman. What are you hearing about how the White House thinks this is all working out for them?
If there's one thing we know about the president, he loves theater, he loves a visual. So this event last night absolutely played into that. I will say it fell short of what we were initially promised, which was Donald Trump patrolling the streets of DC. That did not happen. I'm sure there were a lot of security and logistical reasons that prevented the president of the United States from doing that. But I think this shows a couple of things. One, this is an issue he's really invested in for a number of reasons. We've talked about on this podcast many times, but this idea of he's a real estate guy who loves beautifying things. So this obviously plays into that. It's an effective line of messaging for him and the Republican Party as being sort of the law and order guy. And so I think from the White House's perspective, they see that they're winning this fight, like from their perspective. There was a lot of talk about the early days of this, about this idea that federal officers are being deployed to the National Mall and there's very little crime on the mall. And obviously, we've still seen officers on the mall, but we have seen them also deployed into more high crime areas of the city. And we've really seen strong pushback from the White House, in large part on social media, saying, hey, we're trying to help the folks who need help here. It's the white liberal hippies or whatever who are protesting all of this. They're not the ones who actually need help. I do think in terms of this messaging war on why is the National Guard here? Why is there extra enforcement? I think they've made a decent case about why they're doing it. And we haven't seen, shockingly, the pushback that you would expect. We saw like massive protests in LA in response to the immigration raids. We've seen nothing like that here in DC. And I think that speaks to sort of the twofold dynamic of there is a lot of crime in DC, whether or not folks agree with the president. That just is true. And then also, I think they've launched this very strong messaging campaign around it. and have been pretty effective in combating some of the criticisms that they've gotten online.
And that brings us to the third and final story that you're going to be hearing a lot about in the news today, and that's that the Justice Department is expected to begin giving Congress its first tranche of Jeffrey Epstein files. But as our colleague Haley Fuchs reports this morning, it may be a while before lawmakers actually get their hands on the information that they want, if ever. That's because the DOJ is taking a piecemeal approach to handing over the documents to Capitol Hill pursuant to a subpoena issued this month by the House Oversight Committee. Megan, it's obviously understandable that this is going to take a little bit of time and that the White House and the DOJ are being protective of some of this material. But it feels like it's only going to further allegations of a cover up here. Is the Epstein story back?
Yeah, the tricky situation about this one is that for as much as it goes away, it will always continue to rear its head because that's the nature of this. And the allegations are that there's been a cover up and there's secrets and they're being hidden. I always think about the media's attention as the eye of Sauron. And it feels like the eye of Sauron has been elsewhere the last few days with everything going on with Russia and Ukraine, with everything we're seeing happening in DC. It can very easily shift back to Epstein. And obviously, this is not where the White House wants the narrative to be. The challenge of this narrative is that there is a large part of the MAGA base that really wants to see something from the administration on this. And despite maybe efforts to move the narrative elsewhere, like to DC, I've talked to folks in and around Trump world saying, like, was this intentional? What was the timing of all of this? And no one would quite admit that it was intentional, but certainly convenient timing is how they phrased it to me. But we're seeing this come back. And that just speaks to the fact that this isn't going away. This is something that the administration is going to keep having to deal with. They've now been shut down by the court several times in efforts to unseal some of the grand jury testimony. That is sort of a helpful scapegoat for the White House to say, hey, we tried, they're not letting us. But at the same time, we're seeing these proceedings happen in Congress, and that's going to continue to be like a very tricky situation for the White House and the Justice Department to navigate.
Well, and as always, we like to end the show with something from the Playbook newsletter. Cracker Barrel, the beloved Southern and blue-collar chain restaurant, has unveiled a new, more minimalist logo, both unexpectedly and also entirely predictably, Megan. It has become a political hot potato. Conservative figures are decrying the rebrand. They're saying it's an instance of wokeism from the CEO. The stock price has crashed, and we're hearing from people like Florida Representatives Byron Donalds and Anna Paulina Luna, as well as Donald Trump Jr., calling this new logo, quote, woke, end quote. But the backlash isn't limited to one party. You're seeing people like California Democrat and potential 2028 hopeful Ro Khanna weigh in and criticizing the interior design. You're also seeing Gavin Newsom meme himself in the place of the old man leaning up against the barrel. And so this has really become politically weaponized, as every other thing in our culture has. Megan, I want to talk about this, but first, have you ever been to a Cracker Barrel?
Adam, I have a really deep, dark secret, which is that I've never been to a Cracker Barrel. I'm going to say, though, in my defense, I grew up on the West Coast. There aren't very many Cracker Barrels in California and Nevada, where I spent most of my pre-DC life. I would love to go to one. On the West Coast, we have these fantastic Black Bear diners, which is a bit more like Mountain West Cracker Barrel.
Mm.
But I'm very familiar with its importance in American culture.
Yeah, I actually live about 5 miles away from a Cracker Barrel and am a frequenter. And so I kind of want to do a man on the street piece where I go there and ask people what they think about the.
Do it, Adam. Do
Yeah, yeah.
it.
But there's actually another political angle to all of this. Dave Wasserman, the political analyst with the Cook Political Report, has found a correlation between counties that have a Cracker Barrel and counties that have a Whole Foods. And what's interesting, Megan, is that it's a good predictor of how that county votes. So last year, Trump won 74% of counties that have a Cracker Barrel and only 22% of counties with a Whole Foods market.
Mm.
And that Cracker Barrel gap actually narrowed in 2024. Back in 2020, Joe Biden won 85% of counties with a Whole Foods market and only 31% of counties with a Cracker Barrel. So a lot of political cultural resonance and politicization seems to be kind of a theme running through all of our conversations, whether it's about how Democrats talk about crime or social issues, to Cracker Barrel's interior design. But yeah, go to Cracker Barrel, try the biscuits and gravy, and let us know what you think of the latest rebrand.
I'll do it. It's my next assignment. I'm on it, Adam.
As always, send us your tips, birthdays, or spotted moments to playbook@politico.com. Megan, thanks so much. This was so fun.
Of course. It's so great being here with you, Adam.
And that's all for today's Playbook Podcast. We have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. And before we go, a quick programming note. The Playbook Podcast will be off next week for our own August recess. Megan, I'm excited about this. It'll be nice. We'll be back with a new episode on Tuesday, September 2nd. Until then, have a great Labor Day, and thanks for listening.